So if I can start with you, Craig.
Yeah.
So you led the first dedicated Scottish expedition to the South Pole. Can you tell us a bit about how that came together and what happened? What were the sort of things that happened in your life that led to this momentous
Yeah.
achievement?
That's the entire story of my life then.
Please, in five
In
minutes.
5 minutes. It was really as a small boy reading about Captain Scott. When I was in primary school, actually, my head teacher gave me a copy of The Worst Journey in the World by Cherry Garrard to read, which is a story about collecting an emperor penguin egg, but also about the tragic story of Captain Scott getting to the pole and what happened on the way back. And I read that and I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. Get to the South Pole, become an explorer like Captain Scott. But I was also interested about the other guy that they kind of mentioned in the passing, the Norwegian Amundsen.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, this guy sounds very professional, very focused. So I learned more about him. And as the years went on, I joined the military and sort of became sort of specialist in the outdoors and stuff. And the opportunity came that I was going to go to Antarctica, and it was a whole sponsorship thing and picking a team and then joining with others. And again, it's just getting the right people for these expeditions. So I was really lucky. I mean, I had a lovely woman called Denise Martin. I think one of the few people on earth that can call themselves a North and South Pole guide. And she was just incredible, 5 foot of toughness. She was a Terminator. So she was the guide, and other legends there. We had Hannah McKean, completely opposite of Denise, 6'2", blonde goddess, incredible woman. But other people there that year, which really kept me going, was we had the first American guy, Stuart, who, when he skied to the pole, became the first American to have skied to both North South Pole and climbed Everest. And we also had a lady called Linda, who became the first Australian to ski to the pole. So when you've got a group like that all skiing to the pole together, you're never going to fail. Mm-hmm. Never going to fail with that sort of attitude. So for me, 730 miles dragging a sledge across Antarctica was fantastic fun. It was really, really good, and hand on heart, enjoyed every footstep. I mean, it was hard. It had low temperatures, and I can tell you a few grim stories. But the sort of tent life at the end of the day more than made up for any sort of discomfort we had during the day.
I think it would be good to hear more about, or maybe not so much more, but a bit more about the grim stories, because I think that's an important thing to think about when you take a risk. You're obviously going to come up against challenges that are going to be completely unexpected.
Yeah, well, it's how you look at them. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I talk about grim stories, it's only grim stories to other people.
Sure.
To me, it was just like getting through the day. Mm-hmm. So things like, I mean, there was some days it was incredibly cold, and I did have someone else with me at the beginning, a lady called Fiona that I trained with for the best part of 2 years. The temperature on the first day got pretty low. It was minus 51 inside the tent on the first night, which is uncomfortable if anyone's ever been in that. And the temperature inside our sleeping bag, not the same one, had one each, was minus 18. So if you've got a freezer at home, that should sit about minus 12. So it was colder than a freezer inside the sleeping bag. And unfortunately, Fiona started to develop frostbite as she was trying to sleep. And after 4 days, she had to be evacuated out. She was in a grim way. There was stuff like that. So the cold played an important part. Hunger as well, because you can't physically eat enough food that you need when you go down there. So I got really, really hungry and used to dream about food constantly. And if you read Scott, Shackleton, all these guys, they talk about food, and it becomes an obsession. And I think I got that hungry near the end of the trip. I was actually dreaming of being in a horrible greasy spoon cafe, eating bacon fat, and that was all they sold. And I swear, when I woke up, sometimes I could smell bacon fat, and it's just your body telling you what you need. You need fat because all the fat had gone. By then, you're just eating away muscle. So that was pretty grim. But the hardest thing for me personally, because all those things I just wrote in the diaries, little side notes. It was just a thing. The hardest bit for me was the mental side of things, because I'm married and had 3 young children, and I suffer from horrendous nightmares when I'm away from them. And I think where it is, I mean, I'm like getting older now, thinking back, I think it's guilt. That's all it is, because when I done the South Pole, it's a pretty selfish thing to do when you've got a young family and leave. But sometimes you've got to do these things when it's the correct time to do it. But I used to have horrendous nightmares about what could be going wrong back home. Where a lot of thought would be 1,000-fold. And yeah, that was the hardest bit for me.
I'd like to come back to this idea of home and not home.
Yeah.
But before we go to the first clip, actually, I'd like to ask Iona about how did you come to find out about the Polar Academy when you were 14? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. It was all through school.
Right.
So I got called by the head teacher to come in and see if I wanted to go to a meeting, a presentation by Craig. And that's where it all really started, and I signed my name up after seeing the presentation of the first team doing the expedition, and signed my name up straight away once I saw that.
And how long did you have to train before you went to Greenland?
So I was trained for a year, tire hauling, in high intensity training, things like that.
Yeah, we've been dubbed the toughest youth program in Europe.
Very nice.
Really proud of that.
So, Iona, can you speak a bit more about the training process, the kinds of things, like apart from tire pulling?
Yeah,
what
so
other sort of things did you do?
we also done a weekend away in October, and we went up, done hill climbing. I had never done any camping before this, any sort of hill climbing before, any sort of outdoorsy sort of things. I was always a soccer player, a football player, and I'd never done adventure or anything. So it opened my eyes up to what's really out there. So we'd done that weekend away, gym, also including family stuff, going walks, just really preparing your whole body for what you're going to go through,
Were there aspects of the training that were more centered on your state of mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. And all of it was outside my comfort zone, but I then realised that mentally it's the best thing to do, to push yourself further and realise that you can do other things than what you're meant to be doing, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Also doing other things that you think you can't do.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Often these sort of these fears and phobias are kind of given to us. They're not sort of coming from us. I'd like to get back to that.
Of course.
But also I'd like to, because we're still at the sort of prelude, if you like. So I'd like to have Stephan's prelude and ask you, climate science is such a broad subject. Can you say something about why climate science and what specifically do you do?
Well, like Craig, I started pretty early getting into mountains, I think. And as soon as I did get to begin to understand what mountains were and how glaciers worked, I realized from a very early age, maybe I think I started probably reading about, the first book I read actually about mountains was my dad's copy of the Ascent of Everest, 1953, John Hunt book. And I was 7 or 8 years at the time, and I knew then that I wanted to study glaciers. But the problem is you can't study glaciers at A level, and you can't study glaciers at university. You have to do it a roundabout route. And I should have done physics, but I didn't do physics at A level. But I got into glaciers and mountains in a sort of slightly roundabout way. But as soon as when I was undergraduate back in the, shows how old I am now, back in the 1980s, there was no such thing really as climate change. I did courses on the physics of the atmosphere, but actually climate change as a thing didn't really exist until probably about the 1990s, when I'd already done my PhD by then. And you can't not see climate change when you go to the mountains. If you go to the mountains repeatedly, you see. I've worked a lot in Patagonia and the Himalayas and other places, and you see enormous change just in a couple of years. So one glacier I was last on in 2004. I went back to it a few years ago and did some filming, and it retreated 3 kilometers just in a few years. So you see change quite a lot, and obviously the next question is why? What's driving that change in these very remote parts of the world? And you will have seen, both of you will have seen, enormous changes in the places you go to. So climate change it became pretty obvious pretty early on for me. And of course now, I spent a long time working on climate change and trying to get governments and organisations to understand the risks to climate change and what we need to do about it. And of course now people are really taking this very seriously, but it's taken a long time. So in a sense, climate change now has become one of these things which is, we were talking earlier about the fact that to understand climate change, you can do it from the hard physical sciences, which is where I come from, but it's quite clearly something which has social and cultural and political and economic and implications as well. So it's one of these things which is an enormous umbrella within which a whole range of different types of specialisms can be brought to bear, I think.
So I think that's that's a nice point to have our first clip, which I've chosen. And it's from a movie called South that was released in 1919, but actually it was shot in 1914. And it tells the story of Sir Ernest Shackleton's trip to the South Pole on an Endurance. It's called the Endurance Expedition. And I wanted to show you the beginning of that film because for me it conveys this idea of hope, and it conveys this idea of excitement of going into the unknown. And also we see the faces of the key people that were instrumental in actually creating a disaster into a success. So South, it's an incredible film, which I urge everyone to see. And it's, as Simon said, it's been remastered and it has an IMAX presentation later this month. And then it's released, I think, at the BFI Southbank in February. I think it's a film that should be shown in schools and universities. I think everyone should see it. I mean, that's just the beginning. When you see the end, it's just incredible. So this is a general question for all of you. When you see something like this, how does it make you feel?
Well, for me, I mean, that was the true explorers, the golden age. When you read about these guys in their own words, I think City Early, there's never any ego with them at all. They never mention the word bravery, never mention the word courage. It's almost like we've got a job to do, and we go out and do it. We're going to cross Antarctica. We're going to come back. Everything's going to be fine. I mean, that's proper exploration in my eyes, and that's the thing that gets my blood going, really. Seeing this old stuff. And same with Captain Scott and Nansen and Amundsen and all them. They just had a spirit, I mean, a proper spirit of adventure back then, just to get on and do it, go out and achieve.
Iona?
I think for me, I look to them for inspiration. You know, it's like they were the first ones to do it, and with basically nothing. You know, we've got all this kit and things nowadays that can help us, but they went with barely anything, and that for me is true adventure. And just looking up to them, definitely.
Talking of kit, the Antarctic dress, as it was described and that we saw, was designed by Burberry. Stephan, how does something like that make you feel?
Well, it's amazing. One of the sort of untold stories is often this melding of exploration with science. And I think we often think of science as sort of, these were great expeditions, right? And they did the most amazing things. But also they did some really fundamental science which hadn't been done before. So our understanding of how ice sheets behave and the size of the ice sheets and the ways in which they behave really owes a lot to the initial work which was done by people like Frank Debenham, who was a Scots geologist, then became professor of geography at Cambridge. So and I think actually it shows that exploration in the round is a very scientific. Well, science in the round is a very exploratory type of thing. So I think you can see why lots of scientists become explorers and why lots of explorers have a scientific understanding or a scientific way of thinking about things. And often that story isn't. I mean, you mentioned Cherry Apsley Garrard. Of course, they were scientists too, because they were trying to get these King Emperor penguins' eggs. And I think that those great stories show that science and exploration come very, very closely together, and we'll see this with the Everest film as well a bit later, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that science today has become much more kind of a part of the sort of mainstream conversation, particularly in the last 2 years. So there's like a sort of a paradigm shift where science is becoming much more aligned with a broader cultural conversation. And I think can only be a positive thing.
Can I just add something to that? I mean, my children, especially my daughters, are really into celebrities, and I say, what we learned over the last couple of years, amongst all the terrible things that are happening with COVID, is that scientists have become celebrities, and I always get really angry. When I read the Guardian week in, week out, and every Saturday they had question and answer session, and it was always an artist or no problem. I haven't got a problem with artists, but artists or a theatre director or an actor or a poet, or it was never a scientist. And I always used to, and when they would talk about celebrities, I say to my kids, "Oh, who's it going to be? Some professor of statistics, maybe, or a great chemist, or a great mathematician." But it never is. It's always celebrities are always, people who go on some ITV program or something. So I think what has happened over the last couple of years, and you said about, I think you were talking about climate change and COP and everything, but with coronavirus, I think celebrities now, scientists have become a really important part of the conversation, which perhaps we weren't before.
Absolutely. I'd like to continue the conversation about the Polar Academy,
Mm-hmm.
but before we do, it'd be great to see the clip.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I love about what you said in this piece is how you want to make kids who feel invisible visible.
Yeah.
And can you say something about, and this is something I think Iona will have something to say about as well, but Craig, can you say something about this concept of the invisible kid? Where did that come from?
It came from the kids themselves.
Right.
That's how they describe themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's also how the parents describe a lot of their own kids
Mm-hmm.
as invisible, because what I find the parents and the grandparents were invisible as well when they were in the education system. It came through years, years and years of lecturing in schools on exploration and trips that I've done, and seeing the same group of kids look back at me every single time. I've given talks everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everywhere, to all sorts of kids, and as far as I could see, no matter what country I'm in, there's only 3 types of pupils out there. Broad brush. You've got elite pupils, so this is the group that the school loves because they tick all the boxes, but probably from a stable family, they get the opportunity to go out and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably good at sports, leave school, go on to university or college, or a career, but goes kind of pear-shaped. They can fall back on family. Nothing wrong with this group at all. Absolutely nothing wrong. Great group. But the opportunity to achieve is always there. They get offered it. Opposite end of the spectrum, you've got kids that maybe live in chaos, absolute chaos. But especially in this country, if you want an opportunity to achieve, that's a good group to get yourself into, because that's where all the money gets channeled into. But what that leaves, and I've seen this down here in London as well, is this group in the middle. Essentially, great kids, but maybe they won't be the most academic student schools ever put out, or they won't be the best sports star. But these kids get their head down and try the hardest. But they go through the education system seeing kids either side of them getting the chance to achieve. And they lose confidence in themselves because they think achieving something significant in life is for other people. It's not for them. And the drive to do something about it is gone because it's happened to their parents and the grandparents as well. So they're kind of happy with their lot in life. Now, if I scrub away the groups either side and just leave these invisible kids and start speaking about true ambition, the ambition that's buried deep, I would get fantastic answers for what these kids want to be, and I would see that spark, but it would always be followed up by, well, that's never going to happen to me. These kids were all perfect in my eyes, and Iona was one.
Yeah. So Iona, can you say something more about your experience in how being a part of the Polar Academy? You touched on it earlier, but can you kind of expand on this idea of the invisible child?
Yeah, of course. So I was very shy in high school, not confident in myself. I had dreams of traveling to Australia and doing bits and bobs, but never thinking I would be able to do it or have any opportunity to do it. And then the Polar Academy came along, and it totally just changed my mindset on how I think my family thinks, but also building that confidence and, like I said earlier, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and seeing actually you can achieve stuff if you just put a wee bit of effort and a wee bit hard work into it. Mm-hmm. And that's what changed everything.
Mm-hmm. And it's how you speak as well to kids that are like that. We never ask them to do anything. Mm-hmm. Never. We never raise our voices. We only tell them what they're going to achieve by the end of that day. Mm-hmm. So it's not an if and a may. It's always, this is what's going to happen by 4 o'clock. You're going to achieve this. Tomorrow we're going to double it, and just keep going and going.
So the whole kind of impetus is affirmative and also empowering.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when we're out in the ice, once all the training's done, I mean, it's not a guided expedition. The kids do it all themselves. Right. So they're doing the navigation, they're setting their camp up, they're cooking their own food, they're putting polar bear fences up. Otherwise, it's pointless. Yeah. Absolutely pointless. And we assign a different kid every day to be a leader, and they make all the decisions for the group. So if they see a mountain in the horizon they want to go to, that's where we go. But the key to it as well is involving the parents from the very start. I mean, the parents have to go through selection as well. I mean, I could talk about our selection test if you want, but we take them away for a weekend up to a place, you probably know, the Glenmore Lodge, up near Aviemore, and they do things that we know they've never done before. But the kid comes up with a parent. It's really, really important. And I mean, as an example, that the first task that they do is, it's all very relaxed. And I teach, if you remember this, the rope walk. I teach them how to tie 3 knots. Bowline, figure of 8, reef knot. After 5 minutes, everyone in this room could do this. You've got a length of rope, maybe about that long. 5 minutes, easy.
Do we have any rope?
10 minutes, you'll be able to do it with your eyes closed and have a bit of a laugh. I then deliberately change the mood and say, okay, now put a wetsuit on and meet me in the pool. I put you in a kayak and then put a spray deck on that kayak that's too small, so you're sealed in that boat. Now, I deal with a lot of kids who can't swim, who are terrified of the water. I then drag them out to the middle of the pool and say, right, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to capsize you. I'm going to dive down and give you that piece of rope, and you're going to tie those 3 knots perfectly, because you're not coming up till you've done it. No one has ever failed. And it's how you speak. I didn't drag Iona out and say, are you ready? I didn't say, Iona, are you scared? The only thing I said to Iona is, you're going to tie those 3 knots perfectly. The fact they were upside down on the water was irrelevant.
Sure.
But then when she's done it, our mum goes in the boat and has to do it as well.
Cool.
So after 48 hours of doing that kind of stuff, what I've got is a mother who looks at her daughter in a totally different way. She can see what she's capable of. And I've got a daughter who looks at her mother in a totally different way. And as soon as we've got that, we can do anything. We can mould her into the superhero she is now.
So the image of the upside down kayak and tying knots, it feels like we're living in an upside down world. And I think climate crisis seems to be sort of contributing, that sort of climate narrative seems to be contributing to this sense of the world is not quite as we thought it was from a physical kind of perspective. And I also like the idea of sort of that upside downness kind of coupled with this idea of feeling invisible, because you were saying earlier that you work with kids on the autism spectrum.
Yes. I mean, kids are kids. We don't see any of that in the Polar Academy. We just see kids who are struggling, who need help. So they come to us, and we have parents and teachers saying, well, you really struggle taking this kid on because he's on the spectrum, or this kid's having horrendous bullying trouble because they're trans. So in that sense, like, no, they're a kid. We're going to give them this opportunity, and we know they're going to fly once they start that. We always find a way. I mean, Iona's probably seen it. I mean, I deal with teams of 10 kids. I speak to 10 kids in 10 different ways. It's not a generic thing. And just now I'm working with 20 kids. So I feel a bit schizophrenic, really, doing all that. You just have to find, each one of them has a little key. And once you're in there and you know how to speak to them and what works for them, then it's very straightforward. But it's always positive, always saying what they're going to achieve every day, regardless of what disability they think they've got.
Sure. Yeah. And I think those ideas and those sort of feelings can apply to adults.
Yeah. It's harder.
Yeah, because adults also see themselves as invisible sometimes.
Yeah, but with adults, you've got ego and fear.
Yeah, that get in the way of stuff. Yes, but that's probably a different kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Stephan, do you work with young people as well in what you do?
Well, I work at a university, of course, and I've worked at lots of universities. But I think listening to what's just been said, I don't think I sometimes get the impression that we as scientists don't communicate very well to the people we probably need to communicate. And I work at a Russell Group University, which is a top university for climate science, and so most of the conversations I have is either with other academics, other climate scientists, or with people doing PhDs or with master's students. So I'm only talking to a sort of a rarefied group, and in a sense, I'm also talking to the converted about climate change most of the time. And I've given, like you've done, I've given lots and lots and lots of talks, but it's always talks to the same types of people, and I get quite frustrated because I give the same graphs and the same science and the same physics to people who already essentially agree with me. And I don't think we're very good at getting to the invisible people, because those are the people who are going to, climate change is already making enormous changes to our energy, how much we're going to pay for energy with the Green Deal, going to net zero, all the rest of it, and massive impact on the way in which we run our economies, we run our societies, and yet a lot of people in the middle are not part of that conversation, and I don't think that we're very good at that.
So you've written in excess of 150 papers.
Yeah.
On this subject. Do you think there might be a way to, through your writing, to communicate to the invisible middle?
No, because the 150 papers I've written are all highly technical papers in climate science journals, which are only probably ever read by my mum. I think she reads them, and a sort of handful of other climate scientists, right? So I'm only talking to a few hundred climate scientists around the world, and I'm probably not very good at writing to capture the imagination of these invisible people, and so therefore, I know the science, but I need people in the humanities and communications experts who work with younger people, because I can't do that.
Well, this is what we were talking about earlier, where you were saying how important it is for artists and scientists to come together.
Yeah.
Scientists are often like artists, and artists are often like scientists. Do you think there's a way of sort of framing the conversation, the climate change conversation, within a much broader cultural context?
You put me on the spot a bit there. Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Of course there is. I mean, and I think one of the great iconic pictures of around the issue around the climate science was those photographs which were taken by the Apollo missions, showing the Earth as being this sort of blue globe in this sort of vastness of space. And I think for a lot of people that meant that a lot of the astronauts argued that this was a really foundational time when they suddenly saw how incredibly fragile the Earth is. But of course, we see the Earth as a very big thing, right? I talk to climate skeptics all the time. So climate skeptics say things to me like, "Yes, but the atmosphere is so big, and we can just tiny little cars." And you go, "Well, actually, the atmosphere isn't very big. The troposphere is up 15 kilometers deep, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny skim around, thin layer around the Earth." And I think getting some sense of the poetry and the artistry around those sorts of questions about the fragility of life and how unusual life is actually, as far as we know, in the universe. And at the moment, we're doing our damnedest to reduce its richness. And I think so. You probably, yes, you absolutely need poets and artists and writers to communicate that. And I've done quite a lot. I spent a lot of time talking to poets and writers about these things, and I've written stuff in psychoanalytic sort of journals as well for different audiences. But I think it's a difficult thing for a scientist to do. I'm much better at writing science papers.
Sure. I mean, in the same way that artists probably aren't very good writers, as a broad generalization.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to go to the next clip, actually, and I want to show it to you, and then we can talk about it.
So here I am, nothing around, as you can see. Completely alone. And listen to the silence. Hello! Woo! Completely alone. How many times you can say that in your life?
So that's Mark Wood, explorer extraordinaire, who would have been here this evening had it not been for COVID. What I really love about that clip is how it conveys this idea of the individual in space, in this sort of blank space, and what sort of possibilities that presents. So don't forget this, to think about the kinds of questions you might have about your ideas on exploration, but not necessarily going to the South Pole or climbing Everest or going to the moon. More about the inner exploration, which things like this, I think, and also the kinds of stories that you're talking about, symbolize ultimately what is an inner experience. So this idea of the invisible, this idea of being alone in a sort of a hostile environment, how is it possible for people to understand what that could mean for themselves without having to go to these places?
Well, you're quite right. You don't have to go to the South Pole to feel that. Me and I, we were talking at an event last month, where I was asked what's the most special expedition that I've ever done, the most thing that was important to me, and that's extremely easy. It was a 3-day expedition with my daughter when she was 3 years old. Mm-hmm. We went to a Scottish island hunting yetis for the weekend.
As you do.
And it was incredible. It's absolutely incredible. We just lived on imagination for 3 days out in the wilderness, camping, and of course we found the yetis. We couldn't physically see them, but we knew they were there, and they were very, very helpful. That was really important to me, and I took huge amounts from that, and my daughter can still remember it. Mm-hmm.
How old is she now?
She's 26. Cool. She's a physicist, and that was an incredible expedition. Mm-hmm. Doing something that you don't have to go far to feel that.
So Iona, after the Polar Academy experience in Greenland, what's been your most sort of personal and maybe transformative experience?
Literally everything. Before the Polar Academy, I was a completely different person. Through the expedition, I really gained a lot of mental resilience and confidence, and learning to really push my boundaries on the expedition and to just keep going. Mm-hmm. And understanding a lot about myself on the Greenland expedition. And I think we've got a lot of distractions nowadays, phones, TV, YouTube, Netflix, everything like that, and it's taking that all away and simplifying everything really taught a lot about myself. And I think that's what done.
Stephan?
What can I before can I just point out that was a typical Mark clip.
Yeah.
He goes to a place and says how silent it is, and then shouts at the top of his voice. So, which is why he does a lot of his expeditions on his own, I think, because nobody else will go with him. I completely agree about you don't need to travel the end of the earth to go to wonderful places. A lot of my students say, well, I've been 15 times to Patagonia on big expeditions and spent 30 years working there. And they say, well, where's the most amazing place you've ever been to? Is it Patagonia? Is it Karakoram? Is it Tian Shan or Himalayas? And I go, actually, it's northwest Scotland. Mm-hmm. I lived in northwest. I took a year off for university and climbed on my own for a year back in the late 1970s near Applecross. And that for me will always be one of my home. That will be that becomes to me a sort of get very emotional going back to it. And it's as amazing as any place on earth. And so you really absolutely don't need to, you just need to find that place which matters to you. This is where I think, a lot of sort of human geographers talk about the importance of place, this sort of phenomenology idea, this about how important place is. And I absolutely get that, despite not being a human geographer. I think it really, that really encapsulates what a landscape, which might be quite a small landscape and might be rather insignificant to other people, but it really means a lot to you. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think probably that's one of the best places I've ever been to. So I will never forget the first time I saw the Applecross Hills and the first time I climbed in them. And I spent a year essentially climbing on my own, which sort of got me into mountaineering and realize how self-resilient, self-reliant you can be on a mountain in bad weather when you're 17, not really know what you're doing. I think it was you who said you were knocked over by a double-decker bus. So was I when I came back from Scotland. Oh. So the first, I'd been climbing on my own for a year, and the first time I go back to Northampton, where my parents lived, I got knocked over by a bus. So it shows that you don't. Stuff happens. These horrible things happen. But so I would say that those sort of places mean a lot to people. It's not always these big spectacular locations, I think.
Craig, you mentioned the imagination.
Yeah.
I think that from hearing you all speak about your lives, imagination seems to play a big part in this. How what you do informs your imagination, and then your imagination is then fired to kind of do more. And there seems to be this sort of beautiful relationship between the invisible imagination, the thing that we all have, and the thing that we use as a power, and how that power then enables each and every one of you and others, of course, to do the most amazing things in the real physical world. Do you think that there's something more that we can do, not just with our imagination and the physical world, but with technology in terms of this idea of exploration in the 21st century? This is a question. If you want, do you need some time to think about this?
No, you might not get the answer you want. I'm kind of shy. The older I get, the more shy away from technology and exploration. Mm-hmm. It kind of takes something away from it, takes the spirit away. I have kit with me that I need to have. I very rarely switch on. You probably never saw me use any technology.
No, nothing.
I never use a GPS. I don't trust them.
Right.
Not compared to a compass or the sun or my watch.
Right.
The most important bit of kit. I'll probably learn the same as you, just to be self-reliant and trust your instincts and build knowledge properly rather than depending on kit. I mean, kit's great when it goes wrong, but I'm the sort of old school that you train properly so things don't go wrong in the first place, so you don't have to rely on that side of things. Sometimes it's good if we're doing, because we do a wee bit of science work, so we take stuff and we maybe link with the school while we're out on the ice, and that's always great fun to do stuff like that, but then it's switched off and put away again, forgot about. Then we're on with proper exploration. It's like you work out the direction by looking at the sun in your watch. Wow. It's the most accurate way of navigation. Yeah, just like how the Buddha done it back in the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
with very little kit and very little equipment.
Yeah.
So Iona, you were born in 2000. Is that right?
That's correct.
So obviously you're of a generation that has just grown up with the internet, with Facebook, TikTok.
Yeah.
How do you feel about technology? You touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about it now? I mean, is it something that you feel is very much a part of your life, or are you kind of moving away from these kinds of traps as they could be seen?
Yeah, definitely moving away from it. I use it more for connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like different explorers, I think it's amazing for connecting with people that you may not have connected with all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But for like Instagram and like all the Photoshop, and it's a lot of fake stuff and fake news on the internet, and you can get lost in that world and sort of live on your phone. But for me, I'm definitely moving away from that side of things and just using it to connect to people.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Stephan?
Yeah, I'm sure technology sort of goes against much of the spirit of exploration, doesn't it? I mean, so how I use technology, obviously it helps my science enormously. So we use satellite imagery a lot to understand. So we're trying to understand the behavior of Himalayan glaciers or high mountain Asia glaciers, and how they're transitioning to form what's called debris covered glaciers, and how they then transition to form rock glaciers.
What are they called?
Well, ice glaciers, like we've seen pictures. Over time, they undergo a transition, or some of them do, to form glaciers which are covered with debris. So they're called debris-covered glaciers. Big rocks, size of this room, fall onto the surface of these glaciers, and that then stops them melting, actually. And then some of those will undergo a further transition to form what's called rock glaciers, and there are lots of examples in Greenland and other places. So to understand those big sort of landscape-forming events and climate change, you need climate models, which are enormous computer mathematical models of the projections of the climate system, and you need an understanding of the very large scale, so the satellite imagery for the whole of the Himalayas or something. So obviously technology for science matters enormously, and over the last few decades, it's an enormous transformation of the sort of science we can do now compared to what we were able to do back in the 20th century. But actually, I'm sure that you both agree that actually, in terms of your ability to be an explorer, there must be almost a negative correlation between how much technology you use. And I also agree with you about GPSs. I mean, the first time I was working with geologists in Patagonia, they were working on what's called the triple plate junction, just in Patagonia, where three plates come together. You can actually stand on it pretty well if you've got wide enough legs. The three places where three plates are joining. So it's the size of this table. And they had two GPSs, and one of them was measuring 400 meters higher than the other one. So at that point, I realized that probably they were sitting next to each other. I realized we shouldn't rely on them too much.
And do you use technology to connect with colleagues around the world?
Yeah, and students. So I give lectures in the mountains to my undergraduates and tutorials to them, so I can actually talk. It's a great opportunity for me to go and climb mountains and and also do my day job as well. So, yeah, we do that all the time, of course.
Great. I think it'd be nice to. I'm going to start asking questions, or see if you have any questions actually quite soon. But I think it would be quite nice to have another clip.
This is a valley, which we were one of the first groups to go into this valley. It's in Patagonia, North Patagonian icefield. And this really basically, it sort of shows the sort of landscapes I work in. Those cliffs are completely unclimbed, and most of these mountains are as well. It's amazing. Some French climbers tried climbing there. The problem with Patagonia climbing is it's incredibly wet. So it rains all the time. And they spent, I think, about 2 weeks on that cliff and didn't get anywhere. I think they got a few hundred meters up it. It's 800 meters high, that cliff. So it's a wild place. So that's really important to me, that sort of landscape. It's also important to me because I met my wife for the first time. I didn't say, "What are you doing here?" I met my wife for the first time in 1993 on a glacier in Patagonia. So we always threaten to take the kids back to Patagonia, but of course it rains all the time and it's full of mosquitoes, so I don't think they'd be up for it somehow.
Thank you. In a short while, we're going to see a clip from you. But I'd like to ask Craig. You were saying something earlier about an expedition you're planning with a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
Can you talk
Which one?
is it the Antarctic trip?
I think I've got 4 expeditions this year.
Okay, you have one coming up in summer.
5, sorry. Yeah, the summer one is, we're actually, again, it links in with what we were saying about involving the arts and exploration and climate change and getting the message across to that invisible group. We work in Greenland in an extremely special place. I mean, it's pristine, absolutely pristine, and we're really privileged to be there. And I've been going up there for many, many years and accepted as a local now. But it's important to give back. So from this year, what we're doing, we're actually bringing Inuit kids to the UK and mixing them with Polar Academy kids or kids who may be struggling, to talk about how climate change is affecting them directly. So I was saying to Stephan earlier, like, we're great. We've got the luxury of having conferences and talking about climate change and these future plans. These kids have none of that. They've just got to deal with it. As soon as something happens, sea ice doesn't come in, which it a couple of years ago didn't, they've just got to crack on. The fathers who are hunters can't hunt, so they go hungry. They've just got to deal with it. But of course, if we were just to bring back a group of Inuit kids into the UK to discuss that wouldn't work. I mean, language barriers and everything. So we involve art. I'm married to an artist, so I know it works. So the kids mix, and we have a lot of dance. So being in Scotland, we can easily teach them how to do ceilidhs. They teach us drum dancing. We've got some fantastic singers. They've got some fantastic singers and musicians as well. But also poetry and storytelling is a huge thing in East Greenland. I mean, that's how history is learned, is through storytelling.
Yeah, and these art forms break down those sort of barriers.
Yeah, you don't need language really when you've got true art.
You tell stories in pictures.
Yeah. So that's a thing that's happening, and then we take Scottish kids back up with Inuit kids, and they live the Inuit life just to see what it's like. So they're out hunting.
And they're the same group. Of kids in the Inuit kids and the Scottish kids.
Yeah.
And what's the space between each trip?
Well, they'll come down the end of July for a couple of weeks, and then the Scottish kids return with them. So they go back up with them.
So there's also that journey to Greenland.
Yeah, which is, as you know, spectacular. But then it's what they do up there. So they'll be taught how to make a kayak, a traditional kayak, being taught how to hunt seal traditionally, go out on a whale hunt.
And they also not only hunt the seal, but they prepare the seal and eat it.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just like the Greenlandic kids. You've got to do it properly. You have to do these things properly. But it's not just seal. We introduce them to all sorts of great food. So they'll eat whale. I mean, I get a lot of stick sometimes talking about seal hunting and whale hunting. But this is how the Inuit have lived for thousands of years up there. They only take stuff to survive, really. They don't have that greed gene that we have, where we go out and just kill everything. They take what they need, and it's shared equally. And it just works. I mean, the seas around east coast of Greenland are how it was hundreds of years ago here. I mean, I can take people out kayaking and say, right, what kind of whale would you like to see today? We can pick and choose. Or if I go up fishing, and maybe at the end of August, it's like, we go out and catch a salmon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to catch a salmon now in the UK is so rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a magical place, and when we expose our kids to it, it becomes even more magical and special and protected as well. And then when the Inuit kids come to Scotland, I mean, Inuit kids have the same issues as anyone else, really. And especially now the Western influence is coming into them. But we open their eyes as well, because some Inuit kids think that the best they can do in life is maybe work in the local store. But we're saying, no, I mean, you can be a doctor, you can be a pilot, you can be anything you absolutely want to be. So we just open their eyes up a wee bit, because we introduce them to the Ionas of this world, who maybe thought like that when they were 14, but think very differently now. And again, it's brilliant. So I'm really excited about that one.
It would be nice to see your piece, actually your clip. Yeah. I think, because it also reveals quite a lot more about Iona and her experiences at the Polar Academy.
Hi, my name's Iona. I was part of the expedition team for the Polar Academy in 2015-2016. Before the Polar Academy, I was shy, not confident in myself, didn't believe I could achieve anything as my self-esteem was so low. I didn't push myself outside my own comfort zone, and like all of us that are part of Polar Academy, I felt invisible in school, and I just got on with things under the radar. I was a footballer, so the type of training was completely different to what I was used to. However, I loved every second of it. It was difficult, but it made me push myself to a level of fitness I had never reached before. The expedition itself was truly amazing, and the scenery and the people were incredible. However, I got an injury to my knee about midway through the trip, and even though it was painful for myself, mentally it was really hard. I knew I couldn't let the team down, so I used that as my motivation to get through the pain and kept going. I'm so glad I did, as I got to the finish with the team, and that meant everything to me. After the expedition, my confidence increased. I had done various presentations to high school children, gave talks through radio, on the TV, and in workplaces. However, my life changed again on the 22nd of May 2017, where I attended the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, where a terrorist attack took place and a bomb went off, killing 22 people. I was very near the bomb, and as a result suffered psychological trauma. However, without the mental resilience and experience that I gained from being a part of the Polar Academy, it helped me get through this trauma. I've now just recently finished my HND in sports therapy, and now in partnership with the Polar Academy, I'm planning on an expedition with a team of 5, including Paralympian gold medalist and explorer Karen Dark. We will be going on an expedition in Antarctica to create a new pole called the Polar Possibility. The message of this new pole is to inspire thousands of people around the world to believe in themselves and their dreams. Show them that anyone can achieve anything if you put your mind to it. For any future pupil, I promise this will change your whole life for the positive. Not just for the year you're training and going on the expedition, but the skills, confidence and resilience you gain from being a part of the Polar Academy will be with you for the rest of your life in any situation. Thank you.
I think that's it's a beautiful piece that really speaks to how being a part of the Polar Academy has transformed your life.
Yeah.
But not only from a sort of a physical kind of adventurous experience, but also from a almost a spiritual kind of deep, profound way that has enabled you to even overcome something like being a part of that terrorist attack in Manchester. when you give talks to people, because you give presentations to young people, but also I'm sure you have a lot to teach older people. What sort of messages do you try and sort of really convey and put across? The sort of 3 key messages.
On the spot just now. The 3 key messages is knowing, like I said in the clip there, that you can literally do anything if you put your mind to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely one. Allowing yourself to what's the words for it? Allowing yourself to open up in different ways, mentally, physically, to push yourself further and progress yourself, and exploring different things essentially, and finding your true self through that. And also, I think the main one is talking, communicating about your mental health, about your physical health. I think that's probably the most important one for me, is communication.
So also Craig was talking about communicating between different cultures, bringing the Inuits and the Scots together. So Stephan, you obviously advise UK government, big corporations. What kind of advice can you give to like individuals, like people like us, in terms of how we could think about what's happening to our beautiful planet in a way that that sort of changes this sort of greed gene that Craig was talking about, that sort of changes our need for greed? Why is there a way that we can sort of learn how to reverse that lodestone, as it were?
It's a really difficult question, isn't it? Because we've got, we're embedded in an economic system which requires growth, and unless you change that system, you're going to have a hell of a job reducing your carbon footprint. I always say to people, the most important thing is to first of all get to recognize, understand what the issue of climate change really is. To understand the science, realize that actually this is something. It's not something a Chinese hoax. It's not being made up. It's not natural variability. It's something which is really happening. So you've got to become educated in that sense. But I think the most important thing you can do is vote. Right? Individually. People always say, "Well, I'm an individual person. If I don't drive that car, or if I don't go on that holiday, or if I don't fly in that plane, then it doesn't really make any difference. The plane's going anyway." That's often the argument. But I say, well, you are only an individual, but collectively, as we've seen throughout history, things can happen really, really quickly. We've seen that. We always talk about tipping points in the climate system, how the climate system undergoes one shift to another within maybe a few years. We've seen that in the past. We'll probably see it again in this century. But actually, we can also see evidence in the past where we've had economic and political tipping points where we've undergone, where change has happened incredibly quickly in people's beliefs and the way in which they run their lives. So I think we may be on a cusp of a real change, a real change in the way in which we do things. But I think voting and voting sensibly must be the way forward, because only then will we make the big changes that we absolutely need to make.
And when you say voting, do you mean not only voting in the polling stations, but also voting not to take that flight?
Yeah, absolutely. Capitalism's great, right? But because capitalism, what it does is it provides a supply of something because there's a demand for it. If the demand of that changes, then capitalism just changes immediately. So, in a sense, we can go on talking about how bad it is that oil companies are producing oil or whatever, but in fact they're only doing it because we buy it, and so actually we have an enormous opportunity to in a sense, as you pointed out, that we shouldn't think of ourselves as being invisible, right? We're not invisible. We're consumers and we're voters, and it's down to us essentially. About the way in which our economies shift or don't shift in the future.
Yeah, it's like you're kind of talking about as well, sort of choice, individual choice. We have the power to make those sort of choices.
Can I say one thing? Is that politicians, they're only really they only do what they do because we give them that opportunity, that we allow them to do that. So I think, we may get incredibly frustrated with our political choices, and I'm sure lots of us perhaps are. But I think it's the only system, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst possible system apart from all the rest, and we're stuck with it. So I think we better make the most of it.
When Shackleton wanted to embark on the Endurance expedition, it was just at the time that the First World War was sort of kicking off, and he actually was on the verge of saying, "I'm not going to go on this expedition. I'm going to, fight for England." And he asked Churchill for what he thought. He sent a message to Churchill. And Churchill wrote back saying, "Proceed." So we're going to turn to chocolate. And Craig, if you can just tell us why you've chosen this last clip that we're going to see.
Yeah, this is the really famous film, and the one that I've bored my children tears with over the years. This is Sir John Mills and Scott of the Antarctic. When they reach the South Pole and discover that they're not first. They find a tent left by the Norwegian explorer Amundsen, and also dog tracks in the snow, and a letter from Amundsen to the King of Norway for Scott to take back. That must have been a sledgehammer to the soul for all those guys. I mean, they've marched hundreds of miles. Physically, they were in a bad way. Mentally, they'd be shot. And then to discover you've lost the race, the grand prize is gone. And then Scott takes his chocolate out. God knows how he managed to keep a bar of chocolate intact right to the pole. I couldn't do that. And shared it with his men, and just that true spirit of exploration kicking in. Then it's like, okay, this has happened. Here's a bit of chocolate. Let's cheer up. Let's crack on and get out of this now and get home. Didn't end that well for them, but I just loved that sense of like, okay, there's nothing we can do about this now. But let's get home and let's get safe. And I think about this clip a lot when I'm doing trips, and actually keep a little note of what was written on Scott's grave and things like that. Just I'm not a religious person, but I'm very superstitious. And again, imagination just keeps me going. So everywhere I go, in my head is the last 6 steps to the South Pole. So I can be in the middle of a raging blizzard, and in my head it's just 6 steps, and as soon as I get 6 steps it resets. Anyone can do 6 steps. It doesn't matter how tired you are. You just keep going.
That's what's written on his.
Not in his grave. It's the Tennyson. To strive, to seek, not to yield. It's written on the cross down there.
That's nice. Yeah. So let's watch the clip.
Sir! There. Amundsen. Look. Well, I suppose it was meant to be. They've left their names. There were 5 of them, apparently. And there's a letter to the King of Norway with a note asking Captain Scott to be so kind as to deliver it.
He's forgotten to stamp it. Benny, better check the position.
The pole. Yes, but under very different circumstances from those expected. It's a bitter disappointment. And I'm very sorry for my loyal companions.
Smile, please.
The wind is blowing hard. And there is that curious damp feeling in the air which chills one to the bone. Great God. This is an awful place. January the 18th. All the daydreams must go. Now for the run home and a desperate struggle. I wonder if we can do it.
Jeddy asked me to give you this at the pole.
Well done, then. Sorry you chaps don't like chocolate. Sergio? Bill?
Thank you.
Bertie?
Thank you, sir.
Evans?
Thank you, sir.
That hand still bothering you?
Hardly at all now, sir.
Well, lads, only 900 miles to go. Ready? Heave!
I'd like to thank Craig, Iona, Stephan. You've been brilliant this evening, and it's been, just so super cool.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming along. And if you would like to give a big round of applause for our distinguished guest, that would be great. Thank you.